All right. I think I am up and running. I'm a little early, so I'm going to hang out here for a minute and see if we get anybody to join or not. Um, you guys are going to have to be patient with me tonight because I got like two different screens going right now. Trying to operate YouTube on one and then the PowerPoint and everything on the other. So just hang tight with me and we'll get through it. Doesn't look like I have anybody online quite yet. Like I said, oh, they got one person joining in. So that's good. I'll give it another minute here and then I'll get going. The dog is here, so if he starts annoying me, you will know that right away too. So, anyway, all right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Looks like I have one person here. Maybe some others will join. Otherwise, you're watching this on a recorded version. So enjoy. Here we go. If you have any questions as I go along, just try to type them in the chat. I should have the chat turned on right now. If something happens and the chat's not coming through, got my phone with me, so send me a text message on Remind. This is going to be the review for our exam tomorrow that's going to cover imperialism, progressive movement, the progressive movement, and World War II. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're one of the AP students from Clark High School. If you're not from Clark High School watching this, I don't know why, because, this is for Clark High School. But anyway, all right, here we go. So basically, the big ideas on this exam, three big ideas: imperialism, the progressive movement, which is probably mostly reform, and then World War II. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today as we study all this stuff. And already the dog's getting in my way, and already I'm having trouble with this, but that's okay. Here we go. All right, let's get back to this. So when we talk about this, what I'm going to talk about first is imperialism. Hang on just a second. I'm sorry. Get the ball and get out. Go. I'm going to talk first about imperialism. And when we talk about imperialism, we're talking about several different things. First of all, we're going to look at the causes of imperialism. Primarily, new technology in the world, our new communication systems. What's that's allowing us to do is expand, or not expand, but shrink the world. So we have this new technology, which creates a new world for us. We're not as isolated as we once were. If you remember correctly, the United States is isolated geographically by our oceans. Well, now that we have all these new communication techniques, we are no longer sitting here alone. We're part of the world now. So that's going to have an effect. We're going to be looking for new commercial and business interests, new markets that we can take our products to. We've just come out of the Industrial Revolution. We've come out of the Gilded Age, and business is really booming, and we were producing a lot of goods. So we need new markets to sell those goods to. Darwinism and this whole idea of the white man's burden, and what we're going to be looking as our responsibility to go out into the, uncivilized world and bring them our knowledge and bring them the way we live, and basically look to ourselves to make their lives better. Because let's face it, we believe that we have the best living conditions in the world, and we probably did at this point. So when we go into some of these other areas, we honestly believe that we're doing them a favor. And then finally, there's also a handful of religious and missionary interests where we want to go out. And I think that kind of falls under the social Darwinism as well. So we'll be talking about some of that stuff. I'm going to try to switch screens here. So be patient with me. See if this works. There we go. We're going to be looking at where we went. Where did we go? Originally, if you remember correctly, let me scroll this down. Manifest Destiny had taken us, from one ocean to the next. And the next question is, where do we go? If it was our manifest destiny to go from sea to shining sea, well, if it was our manifest destiny to expand east to west, why wouldn't it be our manifest destiny to go north and south, or even beyond our oceans? And that's going to spur us to keep moving. And so when we look at it, one of the places we went obviously was Hawaii. Hawaii made perfect sense to us, primarily because, like I told you guys, it was kind of like the midway point in the Pacific Ocean, getting us to Asia. And what Hawaii is going to provide for us is a naval base, a naval port, a rest stop, if you will, for our vessels, a jumping off point to the rest of the Pacific world. So going into Hawaii, we dealt with, we did send missionaries in there first. And that's where that idea of the missionary movement is shown in Imperialism. I'm going to go down here a little quicker. A lot of this stuff we've already talked about, but this PowerPoint is going to be on my website. In fact, it might even be there now. So don't think that I'm just blowing through this and you're not going to have a chance to see it, because it is there for you to go back and take a look at later. I have this map here. You can see where the Hawaiian Islands, like I said, was right there in the middle, and it's going to give us access going into Japan, access going to China. You can see that in Australia, also, South America, and it just opens up our trade routes in the Western Hemisphere and moving over to the eastern part of the world, and we can see the benefit of that. Beyond Hawaii, let's keep going here. We're going to talk about Japan. A lot of you guys on your short answers talked about Japan, talked about the relationship with Japan and how that kind of fell apart. If you remember correctly, it was in 1853 that Matthew Perry opened Japan to us for trade, and set up a treaty. You're not going to need to know about the Treaty of Kanagawa for 1854, but you want to be familiar with it just in general. But the big thing about Japan is the gentleman's agreement we set up. During this time, we were, dealing with immigrants and dealing, quite honestly, with discrimination towards our immigrants. And a group of those immigrants included the Japanese, especially in the western coast areas such as California. What we saw was the Japanese were being segregated and being mistreated for the most part. And so in 1908, we set this gentleman's agreement in which we told Japan that we would fix the problems of what was going on. We're going to, basically get them into schools and not going to segregate them or anything like that. And in return, what the Japanese are going to do for us is stop sending people over here. They're going to rescind passports. They're going to stop the immigration before it even gets here. So that would be the gentleman's agreement. Be familiar with that. The Root Takahira agreement. Basically, that was our agreement with Japan. I don't have it. I haven't got to it yet, but we talked about the open door policy with China. And this is basically an agreement with Japan that we're just going to keep things the way they are. We're going to maintain the status quo of the open door policy, and we're not going to have any problems from Japan. And we know in 1908 that sounds great, but by 1937-38, we know that becomes a problem. Logic corollary, we talked about that. Be familiar. Alaska is the other big area we wanted to expand to. Alaska, we didn't really expand there during what we call the period of imperialism. If you remember correctly, there was William Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State, who basically put this deal together in 1867. But you can definitely include Alaska in the discussion of our movements towards imperialism. As I scroll through, you can see how a lot of people thought it was hysterical that Seward would go and spend money on basically the icebox, Seward's folly. And they really didn't see the genius behind it that we see it today. And that's going to bring us to Cuba. And I think Cuba is, when we talk about imperialism, Cuba is going to be the center of the discussion. And you guys did a really good job when discussing our relationship with Cuba, the Spanish-American War, and why we went there. And you definitely need to be aware of that stuff. That is going to be on the test. I guarantee it. When we talk about Cuba, what you want to look at is, let me get to the screen here. It was definitely moving in, we believe that there was Spanish misrule, or we knew there was Spanish misrule in Cuba. We knew about the reconcentration policy of Wheeler, trying to keep the Cubans in check. This was basically set on fire in our country because of the yellow journalism. Talked about all this. Talked about the DeLome letter. And this was when Theodore Roosevelt was actually in McKinley's administration. And he left the administration to go fight with the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War. Now, a number of you guys did mention Teddy Roosevelt with regards to imperialism in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt didn't, um, he wasn't a role player in bringing Cuba in as a protectorate of the United States. Where his role was with Cuba was fighting in the Spanish-American War with the Rough Riders. So just be aware of that. Continue to scroll back to the screen. The Rough Riders, here they are. And then the Maine. Remember the Maine. And to hell with Spain. This is what our journalists, this is what the people, this is what the war hawks, this is what they used to convince the American people that we should go to war. I loved, someone had a meme today that was, I think it was in 7th period, that you had the Death Star and what really happened to the Maine. That was a good meme today. But we didn't know exactly what happened to the Maine, so we put that on the Spanish and said, they attacked our ship, which gives us reason to declare war with us, and that's going to spur the Spanish-American War. What we know in the past, basically looking back, is a boiler blew up. It wasn't the Spanish espionage or anything like that. But the Spanish-American War, that splendid little war that we talked about, it's going to be a very short war, but it's going to have long-reaching effects. For instance, because of the treaty from the Spanish-American War, we're going to gain the Philippines. And that's going to add into our our imperialistic moves, get us further into the Asian area, to the Far East. So know about the Philippines and why we went there. What else? Know about what else? Aguinaldo. Know about the Filipino Revolution and how we handled that. Why they revolted. That's going to bring us into Taft's presidency when he was the first president or first governor of the Philippines. But what you're seeing, basically through all this imperialism, is the sphere of influence of the United States expanding. And I showed you this cartoon during class when we were talking about imperialism, and I showed you the wings of the eagle and how it's basically the shadow of the wings of the United States are extending from one side of the world to the other. And so when we talk about imperialism, that's what you need to be aware of. I'm trying to think if there's anything else you need to know with regards to imperialism. Like I said, these slides I've been showing you, they are on my website. If they're not there, I will get them there. What I might do too is some of these PowerPoints I'm using, when I get a chance, I'll hop onto the description onto the YouTube here, and I will put links to them so you can get right to them. You will need your Northside ISD to open them up, but I will put a direct link to them. So does anybody have any questions before I move on about imperialism? I know I went through it really quick, but if you have any questions about imperialism before I move on to the Progressive Era, this would be the time to ask. And I'll sit here and wait for a minute because I do have a little bit of a time delay between when I'm talking and when you have a chance to answer. So that'll give me a second here to change my slides and get on a different screen. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them up. Otherwise, I'll give it about a minute and then I'll keep going. That's not looking good. There we go. Okay, I don't see any questions popping up, so I'm going to go right into the Progressive Era now. Excuse me. All right. Progressive Era, big ideas. Here's a list of what you should be aware of with regards to the Progressive Era. I'm not going to tell you that the Progressive Era has the most questions on the test, but I will tell you there's quite a few questions from the Progressive Era. Be familiar with the muckrakers, who they were. Maybe not specific names, but know what their goal was, what they're trying to do. We're talking Jacob Riis in his book, How the Other Half Lives. Upton Sinclair in his book, The Jungle. Ida Tarbell and her attack on Standard Oil. And any of the others you can think of. Just be familiar with who they are. Know about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire that happened and what that led to. That's going to lead to a lot of reform with our labor and stuff like that. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900, what that leads to is new forms of city governments. We're moving away from the idea of a mayor, and we're going to the idea more of a city manager style of government. Bringing experts in and getting away from the spoil system and paternalism and stuff like that. 16th Amendment is passed during the Progressive Era. 16th Amendment, what did it do? Yeah, that's right. It directly elected U.S. or I'm sorry, not that. Oh man, I blew it. It imposed an income tax, the direct income tax on salaries and stuff like that. Be familiar with the election of 1912 and what happened there. Um, the establishment of the Federal Reserve, and we finally have a monetary system that is permanent, that still exists in our country today. Be familiar with what went on down the South. You had a lot of the Jim Crow laws being passed during this time, and their effect and what that does as far as, we see the rise of a new Ku Klux Klan party here pretty soon. We see the Great Migration is going to come during World War I, and obviously a lot of that's a key cause for the Great Migration because people are trying to escape from that. And then also the big thing, the women's suffrage movement during the Progressive Era, when women finally get the right to vote. That's going to come in with the 19th Amendment, and so that's coming in 1920. So everything that we see in the Progressive Era, I mean, that's a lot of things that took place, and we see a lot of reforms. We see a lot of reforms with regards to workplace and workplace conditions. We see reforms with regard to child labor. We see reforms with regards to our food and our safety. Man, thank goodness that Upton Sinclair wrote that book on the jungle. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to eat my dinner tonight. So we're really happy for that. So we see all this stuff. Political reform with new forms of government in cities, the way we elect our senators, the way we direct election. And if you remember correctly, when we talk about the reform of the Progressive Era, a lot of these ideas came from the populists during the Gilded Age. They were a short-lived party, if you remember correctly, but their ideas lasted, and they came to fruition during the Progressive Era. So make sure when you look at the Progressive Era, you look at all of this stuff, because all of this is very important, and all of it is tied together. Okay? I'm trying to think of anything else I can tell you about the Progressive Era before I get to World War I. I'm looking to see if I have any questions come through. I haven't seen any tweets or anything, so I think we're doing all right. Any questions before I move on? Because quite honestly, I got to get the dog's ball because it's stuck down here again. So while I'm doing that, ask any questions if you have any. You kidding me? Really? Enough of this. No questions, and 30 seconds of me making a fool of myself live on the web. All right, we're moving on, and we are moving to... Oh, this is what I did want to share this with you. This is what we call the progressive umbrella, and there are a lot of different things that fall under this. Let me see if I can pull them up here. One way you can think of the Progressive Era is everything that you're going to see here that I'm going to pull up here basically is what is the Progressive Era. So, I don't know if you can see it yet. Yeah, maybe not. Oh, there we go. Okay. So you can see it all under there. You can see it, the muckrakers. You can see the suffragettes, the populist ideas, like I was just talking about, the temperance movement. The Goo-Goos, I'll come back and talk to that in just a minute. The middle class women and their role in all of this, because women played a huge role during the Progressive Era. So make sure you're familiar with that. Make sure you're familiar with the key players. Labor unions, they're gonna have a big role in progressivism, as well as civil rights, like we talked about the Jim Crow laws and stuff like that. When I have the Goo-Goos there, what that is that's referring to what is known as good government officials. You did have, we talk about a lot of the things that were going wrong, a lot of the challenges during the Progressive Era. We talked about a lot of the spoil system and everything that came out of the Gilded Age, the political machines that you saw, such as Tammany Hall and everything. when you talk about that stuff, it's very easy to get caught up in this idea that everyone was corrupt. And the truth of the matter was, that's just not the case. The Gugus are the good government officials who were working within government for reform to fix all this stuff. And they were bred out of the Gilded Age and came into the progressive era and really had an impact on what was going on. They helped get a lot of these reforms passed as well. So you can't go into this time period just thinking that that all of there was nothing but corruption across the board. There was a lot of good going on as well, and so that's why I wanted to share that slide with you. Okay, so that's the progressive era. Basically, it's about a 10 to 15 year period. It's going to lead us right up to the start of World War I, which is the next big idea for our test tomorrow. And so when we look at World War I, if you remember correctly, our goal from the beginning was to stay out of it, to remain isolated. And that was what Wilson wanted. That was what Wilson promised, and and he kept that promise for a while. But when we look at the beginning of World War I, we know it started with the assassination of the Duke, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But that was just basically the spark that lit the fire that started the war. Remember when you look at the causes of World War I, remember Maine. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. These are the primary causes of World War I. When we talk about militarism, what that is basically, I talked about it. It was like a worldwide arms race. It was countries stockpiling weapons for war with the idea that if I build up my weaponry, no one's going to come mess with me. And remember, we're in a strong period of imperialism. You got a lot of countries jockeying for a position in the world. They're trying to hold on to what they have and not lose what they've gained. And so this is, so you have a lot of countries, they start building up their militaries to protect their interests. The unfortunate downside of building up your military is you're going to have to use it at some point. And that's what's going to happen here with World War II. You have the alliances. We talked about the web of alliances where it was just, as the dominoes fell, it started with Serbia. And then with Serbia, then Germany declared war on Serbia. And Russia said, well, you can't declare war on Serbia because they're their ally. So we're going to declare war on you, Germany. And Austria-Hungary said, well, if you're going to declare war on us, on Germany, then that's our friend, so we're going to declare war on you, Russia. And that's when England or France said, well, if you're going to declare war on Russia, then we're going to declare war on you, Austria-Hungary. And then Germany said, wait a minute, Austria-Hungary is our friend. You can't push our friend around. So now we're going to declare war on you. And it just turned into this big mess where everyone's just declaring war on each other because they're protecting their friends. And when all the smoke settled as the war started, we had two main groups. We had the Triple Entente, which involved Great Britain, France, and Russia, also known as the Allies. And you had the Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, also known as the Central Powers. And you have these two powers going at each other, and meanwhile the United States is saying, no, we want nothing to do with it, unless we can, keep our trading partnerships going. And that's what the United States tried to do. They tried to protect their economic interests overseas while protecting their political interests here at home. So those political interests being isolated, but those economic interests being an international player. Like I said, the other idea for the causes of the war is imperialism. The search for other people's land, money, and resources. Where can we go and where can we get more resources? Where can we get more land? More land always equals more power, so that's what all the European countries and the United States at this point are looking for. We had the scramble for Africa. Africa had been divided up pretty well by most of the European powers. The United States with the Spanish-American War, that's their jump into imperialism. And then also the scramble for Asia, the open door policy in China. Who is going to have the biggest sphere of influence in that area? So that's definitely a cause. And then finally, this idea of nationalism and your love for your country. All of these are going to lead to the World War I starting, the Great War, if you will. Let me get over here, checking no questions, so I'm going to keep moving on. Guys, if you have any questions at this point, just type them in and I will answer them to the best of my ability. So, in fact, let me do this real quick. Make sure it's working. There you go. All right, let's move on here. Back to World War I. Oh, I don't have it. Hold on. I didn't pull that slide up, so I'm just going to talk to you about World War I now, and if you guys have questions, just shoot them at me. All right, well, we talked about World War I. We got all the causes, all that other stuff. The United States is staying out of it, but what eventually pulls us in is, our economic interests are threatened, and quite honestly, a lot of our American people are threatened during this time. When the war starts, there's this illusion that it's going to be short-lived. It's going to be over in a few weeks. But what it turned out to be was, it lasted several years, and it became this huge stalemate for the first 2 years or so. And quite honestly, if you want to compare it to something, you can really compare it to the American Civil War. The American Civil War, at its start, most people thought it would just last a month or two. And then all the soldiers would be able to go home and go back to farming, and we'd be done with it. The same thing can be said with World War II. We believed that, or they believed that this was just going to be a very quick war. They had their massive resources of these new weapons and everything that's going to make us, let us get in, get out real quickly, and that would be it. But unfortunately, what we ended up with is just a big stalemate where everyone's shooting back and forth, and no one is making any progress in this war whatsoever. Prior to World War I think one of the biggest changes with regards to warfare is generally civilians were off limits when it came to war. But because of this new weaponry that's introduced, because of the new technology, that ceases to be the case. And you see, bombs going off in towns and villages, and homes are destroyed, and the civilian deaths are matching the military deaths during this time. Like, talking about new technology, a lot of new technology was introduced during World War I. You had the machine gun that was introduced, and there was no kind of hunting and pecking type of shooting with the machine gun. When you shoot the machine gun, you're casting a wide net. And if you're in the path, you're going to be caught by that net. And so it's an indiscriminate weapon that doesn't have specific targets. The gases that were used, chemical warfare was used, and the poison gas during this time period. Mustard gas was the weapon of choice during this time. Just a side note, Hitler fought in World War I. I think he was a private or something in World War I. He actually got blinded temporarily by mustard gas, so that might explain the hair. I'm not quite sure, but so that you have that technology coming in, and then the big one. Here we go: submarine warfare, and the use of the German U-boats throughout the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the Germans warned us that they were going to stop any ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean because they provided a threat of. Hang on, I see your question. I'll get right to it. They saw a threat of new resources coming to their enemy, so they're going to stop whatever ship they can, and that's going to result in the sinking of the Lusitania and the killing of American citizens. All right, question here. Does the Britain's blockade? No, Logan, that's a great question. He's asking if Britain's blockade basically encapsulated all of the Central Powers or just primarily Germany. It's just going to be primarily Germany, because if you remember correctly, a lot of the other Central Power nations are going to be landlocked at this point. They didn't go down into the Mediterranean as far as I know. It was primarily just on Germany, which is going to lead to that agreement that we made with Germany when they said, we'll stop or we'll limit shooting at your ships in the Atlantic Ocean if you go and talk to Germany or England and get them to lift the blockade off of our country. And of course we said yes, and Germany said yes, but that didn't change anything, and our ships were still being sunk in the ocean. So that's a good question. Submarine warfare, though, is probably one of the big points that led to us entering into World War I. Now, when we entered into World War I, basically what we saw was we were not prepared to enter World War I. Wilson had passed the Selective Service Act where he had started registering men for the draft. However, he didn't start drafting soldiers. So we entered the war technically in 1917, but it was almost a year before we had any soldiers on the ground in Europe. And once we got there, at that point, it was a mere matter of months before we were able, before the war came to an end and ended with the Treaty of Versailles. Now, when we talk about the war, you might want to be familiar with the Battle of the Somme. That was probably one of the most deadliest battles in the war. The first day of battle is the one in which 20,000 people were killed. It really captured the idea of trench warfare, where there was no movement. You're shooting from the trenches, and if you're lucky, you might be able to move your unit a couple hundred yards forward, and then within the next week or so, you've been moved back a couple hundred yards. So the idea was with the Battle of Somme is we're just going to bomb the heck out of each other until one of us quits. Problem was neither side ever quit, and we saw thousands and thousands of people die. The World War I is known. We've talked about the millions of people who died over in Europe. We didn't experience that vast number of deaths, but we did experience quite a few deaths, which is going to make our country very war-weary following World War II or World War I, and before we go into World War II. The Treaty of Versailles. This is what you want to be familiar with, that Wilson went over there, negotiated that treaty without the advice of the Senate, and his key ideas was to get his 14 points passed, Wilson's 14 points. The 14th point probably being the one everyone remembers, and that's for the League of Nations. Before he came home, before the treaty was signed, Germany agreed to pay reparations to all the European countries. Basically said, yeah, it was our fault. We blew everything up. We'll pay for it now. Wilson comes back with the treaty to the Senate. They don't want to ratify it. They are very concerned about this idea of the League of Nations and the fact that we are basically pledging to offer military support to any other country that is facing an aggressive attack from anybody else. And the last thing Americans want at this point is another war. So the Senate refuses to ratify it. It kind of becomes that the calling card now of Wilson's legacy is that he came up with this great plan for peace, yet it wasn't implemented here in the United States. Other countries joined the League of Nations, but we refused to. But that's a lot of it right there. And I'm sure I didn't talk about, I know I didn't talk about everything because we've been talking about this stuff for almost 2 weeks now. And so there's going to be a lot of information that you need to cover. I would definitely recommend going to the website. I've posted all my PowerPoints on there. You can review those. I know that, I'm trying to think who might have some. I know Hip Hughes History has several videos on World War I and the Progressive Era, and probably on Imperialism too. I would definitely check those out. We got 38 questions going tomorrow, and we got one short answer. And I told a couple of my classes this afternoon, but I'm telling everybody who's watching now, be ready on that short answer with the Progressive Era, because that's where it's going. I'll just tell you flat out. You got a short answer question about the Progressive Era. So make sure you're familiar with that. Make sure you're familiar with, what the Progressive Era was about, what they did, why they did it and stuff. And that should help you. Coming into class, you are going to need to be ready to go right away, because we're going to have one of our classes on flex days. I think they're 50 minutes long. Like I said, you have 38 questions, so 38 minutes to do the multiple choice, and then that'll give you about 12 minutes to get the short answer done. Definitely doable, but we need to be on our game. So, wondering if anybody else has any more questions for me. I can hang out here for a minute. I can Look to see if I have any other slides or anything I can show you that might help you out. Look in here. Got my big one on imperialism. I think you guys really understand what imperialism is all about. Oh, be familiar. As I'm looking here, I'm seeing the Teller Amendment and the Platt Amendment. Make sure you know both of those. Make sure you know the difference between the two. Teller Amendment's like, we don't want Cuba. Platt Amendment's like, well, we're going to control it though. We're going to make sure that you know what they do, and we're going to oversee some of their different things, and we're also going to get that permanent naval base with Guantanamo Bay. My study um, study guidance for you guys. Start with imperialism, go all the way through World War I, list the presidents in order, and then list everything that happened under their presidency in accordance to these different topics. You know, during the Progressive Era, you're going to be looking at Taft, McKinley, and Wilson. You're going to look at the big stick diplomacy of Roosevelt. You're going to be looking at dollar diplomacy. You're going to be looking at missionary diplomacy. Know the difference between those three. Make sure you are familiar with their views towards foreign policy and stuff like that, because they each have a different view about that. I'll make sure that PowerPoint I did with the press, I know it's on there. I think it's called Politics. Something like that. I'll make sure it's online because you definitely need to review that. What else can I tell you? That the election of 1912 is big with the Bull Moose Party and the split of the Republican Party. Make sure you know that as well. Anything else? There's a lot of information on between imperialism, the Progressive Era, specifically, and going into World War I. But the good thing is you see all the cause and effect along this timeline. So everything is kind of tied together, which I think it makes it a little bit easier to follow and a little bit easier to study. Trying to think if there's anything. If you guys have questions, now is the time to ask. If you have those review sheets in front of you that you picked up today, if there's anything on there that you don't know, now is the time to ask, because I'm only going to be on here for a few more minutes. I'm going to put the slide back up with the Progressive Era big ideas, just so you guys can take a look at that. There's a lot there that you need to know, and I want to make sure you know it all. All right. I am going to go ahead and start the sign off now. I'm not going to shut the computer down right away. I'll leave it up here for a minute while I pick up my stuff in case you have any last minute questions because of the time lapse here. I do want to throw out there that I thought you guys did a fantastic job today with the Twitter Wars. You guys continue to impress me every day in these classes, and I enjoyed it today, and I hopefully doing those help you kind of, center your thoughts and look at what you need to know for these tests. But I do thoroughly enjoy them. I will tell you a lot of the other teachers enjoy them, and I'm sure other people who see them online enjoy them as well. So you did a great job today. Just keep up the good work. Let's take this test tomorrow. Let's knock it out of the park, and then we can go to spring break finally, and we can all just take a little bit of a break. If you're up for it tomorrow, I'm going to be doing during Flex, I'll be doing a review of 1754 to 1800. I don't know that I'll have a PowerPoint to go with it, but I will definitely talk you through everything you need to know from period 3 as we go into the AP exam. I appreciate you guys taking the time this evening just to sit down and watch me fumble through all this technology and try to make it work, and hopefully it helps you and it doesn't confuse you anymore. So with that, I will say good night. Like I said, I'll leave the computer on just for a few more minutes until I know that any questions that you guys might have will have been answered. So again, thank you. Good night. Happy studying. I know you have a lot of you guys have several tests tomorrow, so use your time wisely. Don't stay up too late. Get a good night's sleep, and we will see you tomorrow. All right? Thanks, guys. Good night. Oh, wait. Question. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. All right, Sadiq, that sounds great. That sounds like a plan.